We begin in the Middle East, where Israel has carried out more attacks in neighboring Lebanon. Hamas, the group behind the October 7th terror attack, says its local leader in Lebanon has been killed in an Israeli strike on the south of the country. Meanwhile, another Palestinian militant group says 3 of its leaders have died after Israel hit an apartment block in the Lebanese capital, Beirut, in the early hours of this morning. It's the first apparent Israeli strike on the city center since the start of this current conflict. Israel has so far targeted Beirut's southern suburbs and other Hezbollah strongholds in recent days, killing dozens of people. Well, Israel is widening its attacks on Iran-backed groups, both inside Lebanon and across the region. On Sunday, Israel's military said it carried out strikes in Yemen, targeting Houthi rebels there, hitting sites in the city of Hodeidah on Yemen's Red Sea coast. At least 4 people were killed and around 30 others wounded. Dozens of Israeli warplanes took part in the operation. A day earlier, the Houthis fired a ballistic missile at Tel Aviv's international airport. The group has also repeatedly been attacking Red Sea shipping allegedly linked to Israel. For more, I'm joined now by journalist Stella Männer. She's in Beirut. Now, Stella, Israeli forces struck central Beirut overnight. What's the situation there this morning?
Well, people are really in shock. It has been the first attack on the city center of Beirut. Kola, the targeted area, is very well known by the people here because it's a residential area, and it's also well known because it kind of serves as like an informal bus stop. There are some big taxis starting their trips from there towards other parts of Lebanon. The area is also located right next to the big road that leads to the airport. So many people who are still leaving the country through the airport are passing by this area, and people are really in shock today. We don't have official numbers so far if there were more people killed in this attack. But yeah, people are in shock, and also this is another example that that you cannot really say anymore that Israel is only targeting Hezbollah strongholds, as this is an area that is just like really part of the city and inside the center of the city.
Israel has been pounding targets across Lebanon. How have these strikes affected the humanitarian situation in Lebanon?
Well, the humanitarian situation is worsened, and it gets better. It gets worse every day. The caretaker Prime Minister Mideast said over the weekend that approximately 1 million people are now fleeing inside the country. The situation here in Beirut is also quite bad and heartbreaking. There are people on the streets of Beirut with no shelter, no place to go. They're just sitting outside on the streets. It is quite hot still here during the day, and people are trying to find a little bit of shade when they sit just next to big buildings. The people who are fleeing their homes, among these people are also Syrian refugees who came to Lebanon during the war in Syria, and they are now one more time again refugees. And reports have said that there are thousands of people trying to flee back into Syria, as it's also the only border, apart from the border to Israel, the only land border here from Lebanon. So many people are considering fleeing back to Syria as the safer option than staying in their homes that have been targeted.
Now, Israel has been fighting Hezbollah in Lebanon, but also Hamas in Gaza, and now it's going after the Houthi rebels in Yemen. What do we know about the Israeli strikes in Yemen, Stella?
Well, the Israeli army announced several strikes in Yemen, and they said these strikes aim Houthi targets. We know that a power plant and port facilities in Hodeidah have been hit. According to local media, 4 people have died during these attacks. Local media say they were mainly engineers working in this port. Residents also reported power outages due to these attacks. And of course, that these attacks in Yemen strengthen further the fear of the people here in the whole region that this is going to escalate in really a big blown out war, a big regional war that's not only in Lebanon or Gaza, but will affect the whole region.
Stella, thank you for bringing us up to date. That was journalist Stella Männer in Beirut. Let's bring in Kirstine Rønn here. She's a visiting fellow at the Middle East Center of the London School of Economics. And thanks for being with us. Beirut's city center has been struck for the first time in this conflict. How significant is this apparent escalation?
Well, this is another attack that contributes to a very dangerous situation for the Middle East. Over the last weeks, we've seen the conflict escalating to whole new levels that, of course, raise the question whether we're looking into an all-out regional war. But, of course, there are many factors that make this scenario avoidable still. We still don't know how Iran will respond to the attacks. We still don't know how close the Israelis are to conducting a ground invasion of Lebanon. So, again, it's very hard to predict the trajectory of this conflict in the coming days and weeks.
It seems that the targets of that attack were leaders of a Palestinian militant group, the PFLP, and then in Lebanon's south, Hamas says its local leader was killed in an Israeli strike there. Tell us more about the Palestinian presence in Lebanon.
Well, first of all, we need to remember that Lebanon hosts a significant community of Palestinian refugees, most of whom live in camps on very poor conditions, facing very severe discrimination from the Lebanese authorities. We also know that there are armed factions, Palestinian factions, operating from inside Lebanon. We've seen these factions conducting attacks against Israel ever since the conflict started. And we've also seen Israel conducting several attacks targeting leaders of these Palestinian factions. So already back in January, we saw an Israeli attack in Beirut's southern suburbs, killing a very high-ranking leader of Hamas. So this says something about the fact that Hezbollah is not the only armed actor that fights Israel from Lebanese territory. Of course, the Palestinian factions in terms of military strength cannot be compared to Hezbollah.
Lebanon says that 1 million people have now fled their homes in the country. What are the dimensions, Anne, of the humanitarian crisis unfolding there?
Quite immense. As Najib Mikati, Lebanon's prime minister, has said, this is the largest displacement crisis in the country's recent history. He says about 1 million people have now been forced to leave their homes. And if we compare the situation to 2006, where the war between Hezbollah and Israel also led to large numbers of displaced, Lebanon is in a much worse situation now. The country has been facing a devastating economic crisis for 5 years now, doesn't have the capacity to handle a large number of wounded. Also, we're looking into a scenario of displacement that might drag weeks and even months, and we're still seeing people living on the streets, people who haven't been able to find a safe shelter yet. So this is a very serious scenario in humanitarian terms in Lebanon, and we need to remember that not only have large numbers of civilians been displaced, we've also seen large destructions not only of buildings in Lebanon, but also of the farmland that is supposed to be a source of livelihood for the population in the south of the country. So this will undoubtedly take very long time for Lebanon to recover, and Lebanon is likely to be reliant on assistance coming from outside.
Now, we've been talking about Hezbollah and Palestinian militant groups in Lebanon, but there's the Lebanese state itself, and many people do not identify with the militant groups. How do the rest of the people in the country, what do they make of these recent developments?
Well, Hezbollah has always been a very divisive issue in Lebanon. And as you say, you're right in pointing out that many parts of the Lebanese population, particularly the non-Shiite parts of Lebanon's population, are vastly critical against Hezbollah. Hezbollah doesn't have very large support in these communities, and there has been a tendency throughout this conflict to blame Hezbollah for dragging Lebanon into a war. The question now is, of course, what will be the outcome, the political outcomes of the weakening of Hezbollah, of the Israeli attacks, and I think we'll have to wait and see how this scenario unfolds. Right now, there is an unprecedented level of solidarity across sectarian divides in Lebanon. People are helping each other, finding shelter. People are setting up soup kitchens, donating blood. But of course, in the future, we will have to keep an eye on the situation amongst the different religious groups in the country and how this will unfold.
And thank you very much. That was Kirstine Rønn of the London School of Economics Middle East Centre.